On March 14, 1838, a woman walked into the sheriff's office in Natchez, Mississippi, carrying something that would haunt every person who heard her words for decades to come. Her name was Abigail Turner, and she confessed to murder. Not one murder, but 7. Sheriff Henry Dalton had been eating his lunch when she appeared, a simple meal of bread and cheese that his wife had packed that morning. He was alone in the office, his deputy having gone to investigate a property dispute on the edge of town. The door opened without a knock, and when Dalton looked up, he found himself staring at a woman who seemed to have materialized from nowhere. She was thin, unnaturally so, with the pallor of someone who spent too much time indoors. Her dress was plain gray cotton, clean but worn, the kind of garment a house servant might wear on her day off. Her hair was pulled back severely from her face, not a strand out of place, but it was her eyes that stopped Dalton mid-bite, that made him set down his food and stand slowly from his desk. They were completely empty, not sad, not frightened, not angry. Just empty, like looking into two dark wells that went down and down forever without reaching bottom. "I need to confess," she said, her voice as flat and emotionless as a court clerk reading a docket. "I've murdered 7 people." Dalton had been sheriff of Adams County for 15 years. He had dealt with drunks and thieves, had witnessed 3 hangings, and investigated a dozen killings. He considered himself a man not easily shaken. But something about this woman, about the way she said those words with no more emotion than if she were commenting on the weather, made his skin crawl. "Ma'am," he said carefully, his hand moving instinctively toward the pistol he kept in his desk drawer. "You'd better sit down and tell me exactly what you're talking about." "No," she moved to the chair across from his desk with an odd, gliding walk, as if her feet didn't quite touch the ground. She sat with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. "My name is Abigail Turner," she began. And then she told him a story that would consume him for the rest of his life. She spoke for 2 hours without pause, without emotion, describing in meticulous detail how she had poisoned an entire family over the course of 11 months. The Fairmont family, one of the wealthiest plantation families in the county, known throughout Mississippi for their cotton empire and social standing. She described each family member by name: Marcus Fairmont, the patriarch, 48 years old, Catherine Fairmont, his wife, 45, their children Thomas, 29, and newly married, Jonathan, 27, Elizabeth, 24, and young James, only 7 years old. And finally, Sarah, Thomas's wife of 2 years, 26 years old and recently settled into the family estate. Abigail knew everything about them, their habits, their schedules, their preferences in food and drink. She knew that Marcus took his coffee with 2 sugars and a splash of cream each morning at precisely 7 o'clock. She knew that Catherine suffered from headaches and took a special tea before bed. She knew that Thomas was studying law and often worked late in his father's study, snacking on whatever was left from dinner. She knew that young James loved sweets and would sneak into the kitchen for cookies when he thought no one was watching. And she knew exactly how she had poisoned each of them, what substances she had used, how she had mixed them into their food and drink without detection. "I started with small amounts," she told Sheriff Dalton, her voice never wavering. "So small they would barely notice. A stomach ache here, a headache there. Nothing that would raise suspicion, just enough to begin the process." "What process?" Dalton asked, his hand cramping from writing so fast to keep up with her confession. "Building tolerance while building dosage," Abigail said, as if explaining a cooking recipe. "The body adapts to poison if you introduce it slowly enough. The symptoms decrease even as the amount increases. They think they're getting better, but they're actually getting worse. The poison becomes part of them, woven into their blood and bones." She described obtaining the substances, certain plants that grew wild in the woods around Natchez, herbs that could be found in any apothecary if you knew what to ask for, roots that could be dried and ground into powder so fine it dissolved invisibly into liquid. "Pokeweed root," she said. "White snake root, oleander, water hemlock, autumn crocus. Some arsenic from the rat's bane in the cellar, but only occasionally. Too much of that and even the stupidest doctor will notice. The plant-based poisons are better. They mimic natural illnesses, stomach ailments, fevers, inflammation. Nothing that seems deliberately caused." Dalton felt sick listening to her. The detail was too specific, too knowledgeable. This wasn't the rambling of a madwoman. This was the testimony of someone who had studied her craft carefully and executed it with precision. "Why?" he asked, though he was afraid of the answer. "Why would you do this?" Abigail's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those empty eyes, something that might have been pain, or rage, or grief so deep it had burned away everything else. "They did something unforgivable," she said simply. "And so have I." She continued with her confession, describing the pattern of illnesses that had plagued the Fairmont family for nearly a year, how each member had fallen sick multiple times, recovered, then fallen sick again, how the episodes had become more frequent as time went on, how Dr. Samuel Witt, the family physician, had been baffled by the recurring symptoms. "He tested everything," Abigail said with something that might have been amusement in her voice. "The water, the food, the air quality. He never thought to test me." And then she described the final dinner, March 10, 1838, a Sunday evening. She had prepared a special meal, roasted chicken with herb gravy, potatoes whipped with butter and cream, fresh spring vegetables from the garden, and for dessert, a peach cobbler that young James had specifically requested. "I put the final dose in the gravy," she said. "A concentration of everything I had been building in their systems for months, enough to finish what I had started." She described how they had eaten together in the dining room, the whole family gathered as they did every Sunday, how they had complimented the meal, how Marcus had asked for seconds of the gravy, how little James had eaten 3 servings of the cobbler. They retired to the sitting room afterward, Abigail continued, her voice still flat and mechanical. They sat together reading and talking, a perfect portrait of family contentment. I watched them from the doorway. I wanted to see the moment when they realized something was wrong. "And did they?" Dalton asked quietly. "No," Abigail said. "The poison worked too slowly for that. They felt tired, perhaps a little unwell, but nothing alarming. They went to bed at their usual times, and by morning they were dead. All of them." She described finding them the next day, Monday, March 11th, Marcus in his study slumped over his desk, where he had apparently tried to work despite feeling ill, Catherine in their bed, one hand reaching toward the bell pull she had tried to ring for help, Thomas on the floor of his room halfway to the door, Jonathan in his bed curled on his side, Elizabeth at her vanity, her head resting on her folded arms, Sarah in the nursery where she had gone to check on James, and James himself in his small bed, looking like he was simply sleeping. "I spent 2 days with them," Abigail said, and for the first time something like emotion entered her voice. "I washed their bodies. I dressed them in their best clothes. I folded their hands across their chests and closed their eyes. I sat with each one and told them why I had done it. Even though they couldn't hear me anymore, I told them." "What did you tell them?" Dalton asked, his own voice rough with horror. "The truth," Abigail said simply. "About what they had done. About what I had taken from them in return. About justice and revenge, and whether there's any real difference between the two." She had cleaned the house methodically, she said. She had disposed of the poison bottles, washed every surface that might have held residue, eliminated any trace of her crime. She had done it carefully, professionally, with the same meticulous attention to detail she had used in the poisoning itself. "And then I came here," she finished, "because I wanted someone to know. I wanted it recorded. I wanted there to be a witness to what I had done, even if no one could prove it." Sheriff Dalton stared at her across his desk, trying to process what he had just heard. It was one of the most detailed, disturbing confessions he had ever taken. It was also, he was about to discover, completely impossible, because when he sent his deputies to the Fairmont estate that afternoon, they found the family alive. All of them, healthy, breathing, bewildered by the accusation. There were no bodies, no deaths, no crime. Just a woman with empty eyes who insisted with absolute certainty that she had killed 7 people who were very much alive. The Fairmont plantation sat on 300 acres of prime cotton land just outside Natchez, overlooking the Mississippi River. The main house was a Greek Revival mansion, white columns and wide verandas, the kind of ostentatious display of wealth common among the planter class in the 1830s. Sheriff Dalton had visited the estate several times over the years, always on social occasions. Marcus Fairmont was a prominent member of the community, serving on the church board and the county council. His wife Catherine was known for hosting elaborate dinner parties. The family was, by all appearances, respectable and well-regarded, which made Abigail Turner's confession all the more disturbing. Dalton rode out to the estate with two of his deputies, Tom Crawford and Billy Mason, both young men who had been with him less than a year. They had listened to Abigail's confession with growing alarm and now seemed eager to see what they would find. "You really think she killed them all, Sheriff?" Tom asked as they approached the estate's long, oak-lined drive. "I think she believes she did," Dalton replied carefully. "Whether she actually did, well, we're about to find out." The house looked peaceful in the late afternoon sun, its windows glowing with lamplight. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney. Everything appeared normal, undisturbed, not at all like a house where 7 people had been murdered 3 days earlier. Dalton dismounted and approached the front door with a growing sense of unease. Something was wrong here, though he couldn't articulate what. It wasn't that the house looked too normal, it was something else. Something in the quality of the light, or the air, or the way the shadows fell across the veranda. He knocked, and after a moment the door opened. Marcus Fairmont stood there, alive and apparently well, holding a glass of whiskey in one hand and looking annoyed at the interruption. "Henry," he said, recognizing the sheriff. "What brings you out here at this hour?" Dalton felt his stomach drop. He had hoped, though he hadn't articulated this hope even to himself, that Abigail had been telling the truth, that they would find bodies, evidence, something concrete, because if she had been telling the truth, at least it made sense, a terrible, horrific sense, but sense nonetheless. But this, a living, breathing Marcus Fairmont, irritated at being disturbed during his evening drink, this made no sense at all. "Mr. Fairmont," Dalton said carefully, "I need to speak with you and your family. All of them. It's urgent." Marcus frowned, but stepped back to let them in. "Very well, though I can't imagine what would require disturbing us at dinner time." The entry hall was grand, polished wood floors, a crystal chandelier, a curved staircase leading to the upper floors. Through an open doorway, Dalton could see into the dining room where the family was indeed gathered for their evening meal. Catherine Fairmont sat at one end of the long table, elegant in a deep green dress, a slight frown on her face at the interruption. The children were arranged along the sides, Thomas and his wife Sarah sitting together, Jonathan across from them, Elizabeth next to her mother, and young James at the other end, still wearing a napkin tucked into his collar. All of them alive. All of them healthy. All of them staring at the sheriff and his deputies with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. "Sheriff Dalton," Catherine said, rising from her seat. "Has something happened? Is there trouble in town?" Dalton removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "How did you ask a family if they were actually dead? How did you explain that someone had confessed to murdering them in meticulous detail, describing their deaths with such specificity that you could see it happening as she spoke?" "Ma'am, I apologize for the intrusion. I need to ask you all some questions about a member of your household staff." "Our staff?" Marcus's frown deepened. "Which one?" "A woman named Abigail Turner." The change in the room was immediate and palpable. Every member of the Fairmont family went still, their faces shifting through a series of expressions, surprise, recognition, and then something else. Something that looked like fear, or guilt, or perhaps both at once. It was Catherine who spoke first, her voice tight. "That woman no longer works here." "When did she leave your employment?" 2 days ago, Marcus said, his earlier annoyance replaced by something harder, more guarded. "We dismissed her for theft." "What did she steal?" Marcus exchanged a glance with his wife. "Money from the household accounts. Some jewelry." "We confronted her about it, and she simply left. Didn't defend herself, didn't apologize, just walked out." This didn't match Abigail's story at all. She had said nothing about being dismissed or accused of theft. According to her timeline, she had served the poisoned dinner on March 10th and remained in the house for 2 days afterward, alone with the bodies. "Mr. Fairmont, I need to know, has anyone in your family been ill recently? In the past year?" The silence that followed this question was heavy and strange. The family members looked at each other, some unspoken communication passing between them. "Why do you ask?" Catherine said carefully. "Please just answer the question, ma'am." Thomas spoke up from his place at the table. "We've all had episodes. Stomach ailments, fevers, nothing serious, but recurring. Dr. Wood has treated us multiple times." "When was the most recent episode?" "I was sick 2 days ago," Thomas said. "March 12th. But I recovered by evening." "March 12th. The day after Abigail claimed they had all died. The day she said she had spent alone in the house with their bodies." "And the rest of you?" Dalton pressed. "Have any of you been ill since then?" They all shook their heads. Dalton took a deep breath. "Mr. Fairmont, Mrs. Fairmont. I need to inform you that Abigail Turner walked into my office this morning and confessed to poisoning your entire family. She described in detail how she had been systematically introducing toxins into your food for nearly a year. She claimed that she served a final lethal dose on March 10th, and that all of you died by the morning of the 11th. The reaction to this statement was not what Dalton expected. They didn't laugh, didn't express outrage or disbelief. Instead, the fear he had glimpsed earlier became more pronounced. Catherine put a hand to her throat. Elizabeth made a small sound that might have been a sob. Young James looked confused and frightened, glancing between his parents as if seeking guidance. "That's insane," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We're clearly alive, Sheriff. Whatever fantasies that woman has concocted." "She wasn't raving," Dalton interrupted. "She was calm, detailed, specific. She knew things about your family, about your habits and routines, that only someone who had worked in your household would know. She knew about your illnesses, the symptoms, the timing. She described exactly what she used and how she administered it." "We're alive," Marcus repeated, but now he sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as the sheriff. "She clearly didn't succeed in whatever she attempted." "Did she attempt something?" "Then you're acknowledging that she may have actually tried to poison you." "No," Catherine said quickly, too quickly. "We're saying no such thing. The woman is clearly deranged. You only have to look at her to see that something is wrong with her." "What do you mean?" Dalton asked. Catherine struggled to articulate it. "Her eyes, the way she moves, the way she watches people. There's something not right about her. We never should have hired her." "Why did you hire her?" Dalton asked. "Where did she come from?" Marcus and Catherine exchanged another one of those loaded glances. "She presented herself with references," Marcus said finally. "From a family in Louisiana, the Beaumonts. She seemed capable, and we needed additional household help." "Do you still have those references?" "They would have been filed with our household records. I can have our clerk locate them if necessary." But Dalton noticed the hesitation, the way Marcus's eyes shifted slightly when he mentioned the references. He was lying, or at least not telling the whole truth. "I'd like to see them," Dalton said. "And I'd like to speak with your other household staff, anyone who worked closely with Abigail Turner." "Sheriff," Marcus said, his voice taking on an edge of authority, "I appreciate your diligence in investigating this matter, but as you can plainly see, we are all alive and well. Whatever claims this woman has made are clearly the product of a disturbed mind. I fail to see why you need to disrupt our household further." "Because something happened here," Dalton said quietly. "Something that prompted her to walk into my office and confess to 7 murders. And I intend to find out what it was." Marcus's expression hardened. "Are you accusing us of something, Sheriff?" "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm investigating a confession. That's my job." "Your job is to maintain order in this county," Marcus said coldly, "not to harass respected families based on the ravings of a clearly insane servant. Now, if you'll excuse us, our dinner is getting cold." It was a dismissal, clear and firm. And technically, Marcus was right. Dalton had no legal grounds to push further. The supposed victims were alive and unwilling to cooperate. There was no crime to investigate. But as Dalton and his deputies left the estate, riding back toward town in the gathering darkness, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something deeply wrong. Not in Abigail's confession, but in the Fairmonts' reaction to it. They were alive. So why did they seem so afraid? Back at his office, Dalton found Abigail Turner exactly where he had left her, sitting in the holding cell with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap, staring at the wall with those unsettling empty eyes. She didn't react when he approached, didn't turn to look at him, didn't acknowledge his presence in any way. She simply continued staring at that same spot on the wall, as if she could see something there that he couldn't. "Abigail," Dalton said carefully. "I went to the Fairmont estate." "I know," she said, her voice flat. "They're alive. All of them." "I know," she repeated. Dalton pulled up a chair and sat down outside the cell bars, studying her profile. "So you lied to me. You didn't kill them." "No," Abigail said calmly. "I didn't lie. I told you exactly what I did. You just misunderstood what it meant. Explain it to me, then." For the first time since he'd returned, Abigail turned to look at him. Her empty eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. "I poisoned them," she said slowly, as if speaking to a child. "I introduced toxins into their systems over the course of 11 months. I built up concentrations in their organs, their blood, their bones. I made the poison part of them, inseparable from their own flesh. That part is true. That part happened exactly as I described. But they're not dead." "Not yet," Abigail agreed. "Death isn't always immediate, Sheriff. Sometimes it's slow. Sometimes it's planted like a seed and takes years to grow. I killed them. The dying just hasn't finished yet." The words sent a chill down Dalton's spine. "You're saying you poisoned them, but not lethally. That they're going to die eventually from what you did." "Everyone dies eventually," Abigail said. "I just determined how and when." "That's insane. You can't predict when someone will die." "Can't I?" Abigail tilted her head slightly, like a bird studying an insect. "Tell me, Sheriff, do you know what happens when you feed someone small amounts of toxins over a long period of time? You build up their tolerance, you just said that yourself. But there's more to it than that. The toxins accumulate in the body. They settle into the organs, the bones, the brain. They alter the way the body functions at a fundamental level. A person might seem healthy, might even feel healthy, but they're carrying death inside them. And eventually, years, sometimes decades later, that accumulated damage manifests." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving his. "Marcus Fairmont has an irregular heartbeat now, though he probably doesn't know it yet. The arsenic I fed him has settled into his heart muscle. Give it time, 20, maybe 30 years, and it will kill him. They'll call it heart failure, natural causes, but it will be murder." "You can't possibly know that," Dalton protested. "Catherine has toxins in her brain," Abigail continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Water hemlock compounds that cross the blood barrier. She'll start having episodes in a few years. Paranoia, hallucinations, violent mood swings. They'll call her mad. They'll lock her away. But it will be the poison I put in her, working slowly to destroy her mind." "Stop," Dalton said. But Abigail kept talking, her voice never changing in pitch or tone. "Thomas has nerve damage from the pokeweed. It will progress. His muscles will waste away. He'll be crippled before he's 35. Jonathan has cellular damage that will manifest as tumors. Elizabeth has been dosed with so much autumn crocus that she's lost the ability to feel properly. Physical sensation, emotional response, all of it muted and fading. Sarah, well, Sarah will never carry a child to term. The things I fed her have damaged her womb beyond repair. And young James." She paused, and for the first time something like emotion crossed her face. Not regret exactly, but perhaps a distant acknowledgement of something lost. "James was the hardest," she said softly. "He's just a child, but he's also a Fairmont, and the poison doesn't discriminate. He'll live long, longer than the others. But his life will be marked by suffering, chronic illness, early aging, the death of his own children. The toxins are in his blood now, and when he has children, they'll inherit trace amounts. The Fairmont line will wither slowly, generation by generation, until it disappears entirely. Dalton felt sick. Not because he believed her, the claims were too outlandish, too much like something from a Gothic novel, but because of the certainty with which she spoke, the absolute conviction that what she was describing would come to pass. "This is madness," he said. "Even if you did poison them, even if everything you're saying is true, you can't predict the future. You don't know what will happen to them." "Don't I?" Abigail smiled, and it was the most disturbing expression Dalton had ever seen on a human face. "I've studied poisons for years, Sheriff. I know exactly what each substance does, how it accumulates, how it manifests over time. I didn't choose randomly. Every dose was calculated. Every substance was selected for specific effects. I built their deaths into their bodies as carefully as an architect builds a house. The structure is there now. It just takes time for the walls to fall." "Why?" Dalton asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Why would you do this? What did the Fairmonts do to you?" Abigail's smile faded. The emptiness returned to her eyes. "Ask them," she said, "though I doubt they'll tell you the truth. People like the Fairmonts never do. They bury their crimes and move on, pretending to be respectable while the bodies rot beneath their foundations." "What bodies?" Dalton demanded. "Whose bodies?" But Abigail had turned back to the wall, resuming her eerie vigil. She wouldn't say another word, no matter how much Dalton pressed her. Dalton spent the next day trying to piece together Abigail Turner's background. He sent telegrams to Louisiana inquiring about the Beaumont family that Marcus Fairmont had mentioned. He checked records in Natchez and surrounding counties, looking for any documentation of Abigail's existence before April 1837. He found nothing. No birth records, no previous employment records, no family connections. The Beaumonts in Louisiana had never heard of anyone named Abigail Turner. There were no references, no letters of recommendation, no paper trail of any kind. It was as if she had simply materialized out of thin air on the doorstep of the Fairmont estate. This should have been impossible. In 1838 in Mississippi, everyone had a history. Everyone came from somewhere, had connections to something. Even freed slaves had papers documenting their manumission. But Abigail Turner appeared to have no past at all. Frustrated, Dalton decided to return to the Fairmont estate and speak with the household staff as he had originally intended. Marcus Fairmont wouldn't like it, but Dalton was within his rights to interview potential witnesses to a crime, even a crime that apparently hadn't happened. He went alone this time, early in the morning, hoping to catch the servants before the family was awake. The kitchen staff, he knew, started work before dawn to prepare breakfast. That would be his best opportunity to ask questions without Marcus interfering. The kitchen building sat separate from the main house, connected by a covered walkway, a common design in the South, meant to keep heat and cooking smells away from the living quarters. Dalton approached it just as the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Through the window, he could see movement, someone inside moving between the cooking fire and the work table. He knocked on the doorframe and called out, "Hello. Anyone available to speak with the sheriff?" A young black woman appeared in the doorway, maybe 20 years old, with intelligent eyes and flour dust on her apron. She looked startled to see him, then worried. "Sheriff," she said. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all. I just need to ask some questions about the household." "You are?" "Ruth, sir. I work in the kitchen." She glanced back over her shoulder nervously. "Master Fairmont don't like us talking to people without permission." "Master Fairmont doesn't need to know," Dalton said gently. "I just want to ask you about Abigail Turner." Ruth's expression changed immediately. Fear, unmistakable and sharp. "That woman," she whispered. "You knew her." "Everyone knew her. Or tried not to, anyway." Ruth stepped outside, pulling the door partly closed behind her. She kept her voice low. She wasn't right, sir. In the head. The way she moved, the way she looked at people, like she was always watching, always calculating something. How long did she work here? Started in April last year. The mistress hired her sudden-like, didn't consult with the rest of us. Just showed up one day and started working. Did she say where she came from? Ruth shook her head. Never talked about herself at all. Never talked much about anything. Truth be told, she'd do her work and then just disappear. You'd turn around and she'd be gone, quiet as a ghost. Then you'd turn back and she'd be right behind you, making no sound at all. Scared me half to death more than once. Did she have any friends among the staff? Anyone she confided in? No one wanted to be close to her, Ruth said firmly. There was something wrong about her, like she wasn't quite human, you know. I know that sounds foolish, but that's how it felt. Dalton nodded encouragingly. Did you notice anything strange about the family's illnesses? They've been sick repeatedly over the past year. Ruth bit her lip, her expression troubled. That started after she came. Never occurred to me to connect them before, but yes, Master Thomas was the first to get sick. Maybe 3 weeks after she arrived, then the others one by one. Dr. Witt was here so often he practically lived in the house. Did Abigail help care for them when they were ill? Oh yes, Ruth said, and there was something bitter in her voice. She was especially attentive when they were sick. Mistress Catherine even praised her for it, said she was devoted. But she trailed off, looking uncertain. What is it? Dalton prompted. Ruth lowered her voice even further. I saw her one night, late. I'd come back to the kitchen to fetch something I'd forgotten. Abigail was in the herb pantry, mixing something in a bowl. When she saw me, she put herself between me and whatever she was working on, like she didn't want me to see. Did you ask what she was doing? I did. She said it was medicine for the family. Dr. Wood had asked her to prepare some herbal remedy. But the way she said it, and the way she looked at me, Ruth shuddered. I didn't ask again. I got what I needed and left. Can you remember what date that was? Ruth thought for a moment. August, I think. Late August. The heat was terrible that month. I remember because Master Jonathan was sick, and the heat was making it worse. August. Abigail had been working at the estate for 4 months by then. According to her own timeline, she would have been well into her poisoning campaign. Ruth, Dalton said carefully. Do you know anything about someone named Hannah? The change in Ruth's face was dramatic. Color drained from her cheeks. Her eyes went wide. How do you know about Hannah? I don't, Dalton admitted. That's why I'm asking you. Ruth looked around nervously, checking to make sure they were still alone. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. Hannah was one of us. Worked here since she was a girl. She died last March, just before Abigail showed up. Ruth's eyes were glistening now. She was my friend. One of the kindest souls I ever knew. And what happened to her? She stopped, unable or unwilling to continue. What happened to her, Ruth? She got sick, Ruth said, but there was something evasive in her voice. Real sick. Died after a few weeks. They buried her in the plot out back. What kind of sickness? Ruth wouldn't meet his eyes. Don't know. Dr. Witt couldn't figure it out. She just wasted away. Dalton had interviewed enough witnesses to know when someone was holding back. Ruth, if you know something, you need to tell me. It could be important. I can't, Ruth whispered. If they knew I'd talk to you about Hannah, about what really happened. Please, Sheriff. I've already said too much. You should go. Just tell me one thing, Dalton pressed. Did Abigail Turner know Hannah? Ruth's eyes met his, and in them he saw pain and guilt and fear all mixed together. Hannah had a sister, she said finally. Older sister who got sold away when they were young. Hannah used to talk about her sometimes, wondering where she was, hoping she was all right. And then Hannah died. And a few weeks later, Abigail showed up. She looked at Dalton, her expression pleading. I thought maybe, but that's impossible, isn't it? How would she have even known Hannah was here? And if she was the sister, why wouldn't she say so? Maybe, Dalton said slowly, because she found out her sister was dead. And maybe she found out why. Ruth's expression confirmed what he was thinking. There was more to Hannah's story. Something dark that Ruth knew but wouldn't, or couldn't, say. Before he could press further, they heard voices from the main house. The family was waking up. You have to go, Ruth said urgently. If Master Marcus finds you here questioning us. I understand. Thank you, Ruth. You've been very helpful. As Dalton walked back to his horse, his mind was racing. Hannah. An older sister. A mysterious illness and death. Abigail arriving shortly afterward. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture he didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Whatever had happened to Hannah, it was connected to Abigail's poisoning confession. He was certain of it now. He just had to figure out how. Dr. Samuel Witt's office was above the Mercantile on Main Street, 2 rooms filled with medical books, specimen jars, and the pervasive smell of carbolic acid and ether. Witt himself was a man in his 50s, thin and scholarly, with spectacles perpetually sliding down his nose. He looked up from his desk when Dalton entered, surprise crossing his face. Henry. I wasn't expecting you. Is someone ill? No, Samuel. I need to talk to you about a case. The Fairmont family. Witt frowned. What about them? Their illnesses over the past year. I need to see your records. The doctor's frown deepened. That's confidential medical information. I can't just. Samuel. A woman has confessed to systematically poisoning them. I need to see if her timeline matches up with their symptoms. Witt went pale. Poisoning. But they're all healthy now. Well, relatively speaking. No worse than usual. Tell me about usual. How often were you treating them? Witt pulled out a leather-bound ledger, flipping through pages covered in cramped handwriting. Let's see. First call was May 1, 1837. Thomas Fairmont. Severe abdominal cramping and fever. Treated with laudanum and bed rest. Recovered after 3 days. Who was sick next? Catherine. 2 weeks later. Same symptoms. Then Jonathan in June, and Marcus in July, Elizabeth in August. They were all experiencing similar complaints. Stomach pain, nausea, fever, muscle weakness. The episodes would last 3 to 5 days, then resolve completely. How often? Witt ran his finger down the page. Initially, every few weeks. But by autumn, it was happening more frequently. Sometimes multiple family members would be sick at once. I was there at least twice a week through December. And after January, it became almost constant. I moved some of my supplies to their estate because I was spending so much time there. Someone was always ill. I tested everything, the water supply, the food stores, even the air quality in the rooms. I was convinced there had to be an environmental cause, some contamination I wasn't detecting. But you found nothing. Nothing. It was baffling. The symptoms suggested some kind of toxin, but I couldn't identify the source. And then about 2 weeks ago, it just stopped. Dalton leaned forward. Stopped completely. Yes. Thomas had an episode on March 12th, the last I was called out. Since then, nothing. No one in the family has reported any symptoms. It's as if whatever was causing it simply vanished. March 12th. The day the Fairmonts said they had dismissed Abigail. The day after she claimed to have killed them all. Samuel, I need you to look at something. Dalton pulled out the notes he had taken from Abigail's confession, the detailed list of substances she claimed to have used. If someone had been administering these compounds in small doses over nearly a year, would it produce the symptoms you observed? Witt studied the list, his expression growing more troubled with each line. Pokeweed root, white snake root, oleander, water hemlock, autumn crocus, arsenic. Good God, yes. Small, regular doses of these would produce exactly the symptoms I treated. The timing of onset, the duration, the recovery periods, it all fits. And if someone had been building up the doses over time, the tolerance effect would mask the increasing toxicity, Witt said slowly. The symptoms might actually decrease even as the damage accumulated. The body would adapt to the presence of the toxins while they continued to do internal harm. Could that harm be permanent? Could it cause delayed effects years later? Witt removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. Henry, are you asking me if Abigail Turner actually succeeded in poisoning the Fairmont family? I'm asking if it's possible. The doctor was silent for a long moment, staring at the list of poisons. Arsenic accumulates in bone and hair. It can cause long-term cardiovascular damage. The plant compounds, pokeweed, hemlock, oleander, they can cause lasting nerve damage, organ dysfunction, cellular changes that might not manifest for years. Autumn crocus contains colchicine, which affects cell division. Insufficient, accumulated doses. He looked up at Dalton, his face grim. Yes, he said quietly. It's possible. If someone had been carefully administering these substances over an extended period, they could have caused damage that won't become apparent until years later. The victims might feel perfectly healthy now while carrying the effects of chronic poisoning that will eventually kill them. How would we prove it? You can't, Witt said flatly. Not without exam.